Over the past few weeks, we've got a lot of new information about Space Engineers 2, about water, about survival and colonisation, planets, a bunch of stuff about NPCs, emotes and new blocks, and also a large deep dive into how combat might be working in Space Engineers 2. So this video will split into 5 sections, one for water, one for survival, one for planets, one for those misc things like NPCs and emotes, and then one at the end for combat, so make sure you stick to the end to see all of that. As mentioned previously, water and survival are currently being worked on in parallel, and because of that there is a lot of work happening on water at the moment. Currently they're making sure that water both looks nice, but most importantly is also performance friendly. They gave us 3 videos recently on water. This one you can see here is them testing out buoyancy. In previous teasers, whilst there were things like ships and blocks in the teasers, it didn't appear that the flowing water was actually interacting with them. The ships kind of just stayed in position, and in this one you can see that they drop the block in the water and it gets pushed along the water down the hill in glorious low bitrate fashion.
I love me some YouTube bitrate.
And also one of the things you'll notice is that the water looks much better, despite the low bitrate, than it has in previous teasers. So the appearance of the water has been improved massively since the last couple of showcases for it. There's another video here and you can see the water interacting with a player, which is very important, obviously it needs to do that. And you can see it's flowing along this aqueduct and taking the player with it. So to all those players that are hoping to burst a dam and wash a bunch of players away from their ships and bases, don't worry, it's all going to be possible. I'm sure this is going to open the doors to all kinds of things like theme parks with water slides and stuff like that. You already know there's going to be a community for that kind of thing. There's also a third buoyancy test here using the same rubber ducky that was recently added as a mod on the workshop. And one of the things you can see in this showcase, which you couldn't see in the other ones, is the new foam that they've added to the water. Like at the end here when the duck gets into the pool with the other ducks, you can see the foam sloshing around them. It's there a little bit on the previous teasers, but it's showcased so much better on this one. It looks so good. And the final water teaser is this one here, where they've created a little hole in the bottom of this armor block that is so small you can barely see, and it's created this kind of whirlpool effect as the water gets sucked through the hole. So that shows that the water in Space Engineers 2 is so realistic, they're able to simulate things like whirlpools and stuff like that. So it's going to be absolutely crazy when we finally get access to it. You can see around the edge there's these particles coming off as the water hits the edge of the box, and I think we've seen this previously but it did not look as good as this. So every time we see water it's visually improving, and we also get shown just how good it's going to be. And I'm sure there are many players out there like me that cannot wait to get their hands on it. So, survival. In a previous video we spoke about colonisation and how that was going to be the main way that progression was going to be measured in Space Engineers 2, and in a recent dev diary they went into this in depth. VS2, Planets and Survival. This is our main priority now. SE1 didn't have an explicit meta loop, and this was a benefit. It kept the game pretty open and people focused on what they wanted to do, but also a disadvantage. Some players actually want clear objectives and a visible success metric. I feel pretty good about the final meta loop we designed. Your goal is to colonise the Almagest sector after sector. You can see your colonisation progress on the colonisation map. The whole Almagest, sectors, planets, GPS locations, etc. We saw this colonisation map in a previous leak and I did a whole video about it, so check that out if you're interested. You colonise sectors by completing contracts and missions. Contract types, engineering, exploration, mining, and in the future, combat too. This gives the ultimate purpose and end goal, colonise the Almagest. Everything will converge to this singular goal, and it's visible, tangible, and easy to understand and communicate. It's an end goal you can reach within a reasonable amount of time, and the game doesn't end there. It can continue in open-ended freestyle sandbox mode. You can keep building, or you can just complete more missions. This isn't all though. Below this post there's also comments and a couple of people asked questions, and Marek Rosa, the CEO of Keen Software House, answered them. This question was asked by Dion: do sectors have to be completed in order, or is a non-linear approach available? To which Marek replied, sectors are connected through a fast travel network that guides a general progression order. However, players will still have some flexibility in choosing the path within certain branching points. For example, after completing Sector A, the player unlocks both Sector B and C. The player can choose to complete either Sector B or C next. Completing either one then unlocks Sector D. Another thing is Jump Drive. You can use it to travel in any order but only to unlock sectors. And then responding to a question about fast travel. Yes, fast travel is similar to the Jump Drive, but with some limitations. You need a fast travel block at the original location and the destination location too, so you lose the freedom of the Jump Drive. PS will also have a Jump Drive block, but it's late game mechanics. There was also a question about colonisation and whether or not you actually have to do it, or if it's just for guiding new players. Marek responded, colonisation in SE2 means completing missions in a sector. Each completed mission gives you colonisation units, CUs. Once you've reached the required amount in a sector, it becomes fully colonised. It's an optional meta progression system that unlocks more content and reflects your impact on the world, but you can ignore it if you prefer just exploring or building. VS2, which is Survival on Planets, is planned for this year. Hopefully we can make it. So, there is a lot to go through there. I'd first like to say I like this system. Guiding players around the star system is a very good idea, especially for new players. And giving players meaningful progression and a reason to do things I think is also a really good idea. And I also like, for all those people that don't want to do those things, you can still just do whatever you want. It's still Space Engineers, you can just build and play sandbox, or you can fight ships or fly around wherever you want. It's fine. I've already said in my previous video, I like the map. I like that you have to colonize sector by sector. I hope they're related to factions and that different factions control different areas and give you quests. Colonization being linked to contracts and missions is very interesting. That means that the player isn't the one directly responsible for colonization. They're just kind of helping out with it. Space Britain Simulator. And speaking of helping out with things, I have a really big video in the works that you guys have been asking for a long time. But with all the work that's going into it, I was thinking we could make it a sub-goal thing. So when I hit 75,000 subscribers, I will release it, which should be a fairly straightforward goal to reach. Out of all the mission types, I'm really interested in the exploration one. I'm really curious of what we'll need to explore in Space Engineers 2. I hope it's just not go to an area and scan it and go, yep, there's some rocks here, good, and then fly back. I hope it's, ooh, what's in this cave? Is it some sort of alien life? Is it some sort of precursor artifact? Am I already overthinking this? Maybe. And it'll be interesting to see if engineering missions are just building something, or if it actually have to do some engineering as part of it. The way I've read the bit about sectors is that you'll only be able to fast travel to sectors once you've unlocked them, and that you'll only be able to colonize sectors once you've unlocked them. But it sounds to me that you'll still be able to go to these sectors and do normal Space Engineer stuff to them. It sounds like the unlocking of sectors is explicitly linked to allow you to colonize them, which means ignoring the colonization system doesn't affect what you can do there. My one main hope of this is that Sector A is like easy mode area, like Babies vs Space Engineers, where there's little to nothing hostile to you. And then as you expand out to Sector B, Sector C, Sector D, and then all the other sectors, we know there's around 12-ish in total, that the further you go along on these sectors, the more difficult they are, the higher level enemies, the better ores, and stuff like that. Years ago, I did a video talking about progression in Space Engineers, that if we had a set starting area, which in this case appears to be Sector A, which I'm also assuming is where our Earth-like planet is located. The reason I say Earth-like planet is because I thought it was pronounced Verdure, but apparently it's pronounced Verger, and I don't want to say Verger, so I'm going to call it Earth-like planet until someone tells me otherwise. And then in that video, if we have a set starting location, we could make the world get more and more difficult the further away you get from the start, with harder quests and harder enemies. But also the further from the start you get, the more ores you have access to and the more advanced blocks you can build and stuff like that. And the point of the video was that that kind of system is a good way to control the difficulty and progression of the game, and it seems like Space Engineers 2 is implementing a system similar to this. In Space Engineers 1, difficulty and progression had to be a flat curve, as you could start anywhere, being on any of the planets or in space, so the game had to account for that, giving you absolutely everything you needed to survive wherever you were. As with every new Space Engineers 2 feature, some people are probably going to be really mad about this, but I do think this is a good idea for 95% of players, and I'm sure you can turn it off if you really want to. The fast travel network is an interesting thing. It kind of sounds like warp gates around the star system, and I think that's a fairly good solution to the jump drive problem. I've spoke about the jump drive in the past and how I don't like it, and that mainly comes from where it fits into progression and not necessarily what it actually does. So the jump drive being moved to the late game is something I'm personally a big fan of, and this fast travel system sounds very interesting, so I look forward to seeing how it works in game. Also, as a final note before we move on to the next survival topic, it's nice to see that they're still planning for Vertical Slice 2 to come out later this year, as it still shows that Space Engineers 2's development is still on track. And I too hope that Survival on Planets comes out later this year, because I cannot wait. Another thing they've been recently speaking about is the first time user experience of Space Engineers 2. This being something that you experience the first time you play the game, and also to teach new players how to play the game. This is from a recent blog post. Here's how the first time user experience works. You spawn on Verdure or Verger planet with a GPS marker leading you to a cave. First, you'll need to dig out the entrance. Inside, you'll discover an unfinished ship with several components shown as projections, thrusters, survival kit, etc. I think this is the first confirmation of the survival kit being Space Engineers 2. Your tasks include mining ore within the cave, using backpack building and projection building to weld up the projected blocks, finding batteries from a nearby stack and installing them in the ship for power. A video was released recently on the Space Engineers newsletter showing this behaviour. You can see that they slot a power module onto the battery block, and then the gravity generator turns on, pulling down the components. Then they remove the power module from the blocks, and all the power turns off again. We'll talk about this more in a bit. Back to this. Next is expanding the cave entrance to fly out, flying to a nearby mountain where an abandoned station awaits, landing and transferring batteries to power up the station grid. This is where the prototype currently ends, but our goal is to create a 1 to 2 hour first time user experience that concludes at an orbital station. After that, the freeform colonization meta loop begins, which we've already discussed. Now, this isn't the final version, as they've said in this quote, that they haven't done the conclusion when you get to an orbital station. But as I've said before, a guided experience for new players to teach them how to play the game is very good. And that being integrated into the main game is a good way to get new players into the game. The battery stuff is very interesting to me. The fact that you can remove a module from a battery and put it in another block is an amazing quality of life feature. And as I've always said, I love little interactive elements on blocks. There's just something so, what's the word? Tactile about how it works. Like charging batteries on your base and then slotting it out from your base and putting it on your rover is a super cool idea. And it means you won't need connectors to charge your basic rovers and ships, which is another quality of life addition, but also it's another thing that helps out early game players as well, as you don't immediately need to figure out how docking works. I'm also really curious how this fits in with the upgrade module slots we've seen on all the production blocks. The battery has a different icon behind where the module goes compared to the production blocks, so presumably these use a different type of module. The only criticism I'd maybe have of this at the moment is that if you give a player a ship straight away, which you can understand why you'd want to do that, it is Space Engineers after all, I don't know what the point of having a rover is, as a rover is just going to be a worse ship. But as a rover enjoyer, I'm happy to sacrifice the beginner rover experience in order to give new players a better experience for the game. It's probably a better idea to get people into the game first, before we start brainwashing them with rover propaganda. Anyway, that's enough yapping about rovers, let's take a look at planets. A lot of the screenshots you've been getting recently have been showing off trees, and I have to admit they do look pretty good. You can see that there is this forested area looking across to some sort of like deserty area over here. I think this here might be a riverbed. It just doesn't have the water in it, because if you open up the mod editor for the game, you can load up and view the planets. And on Verdure, or Verdure, all the rivers and oceans are there, but there's no water, and it kind of has this like gravelly texture you can see over here. So maybe this is supposed to be a foresty area with a river and then a desert on the other side. But still, this looks absolutely gorgeous. I'm always blown away by pictures of planets in Space Engineers 2. It's one of the main things I'm excited about is exploring the geography of this planet. There's this tiny screenshot here of changes they've made to cloud lighting in Space Engineers 2. In a previous video, I criticised how the clouds look, and many people told me this is a real-life cloud phenomena, which isn't what I said, but whatever. This cloud lighting change they've made here does make them look way better though. It appears on both screenshots the clouds are still there, but on the left the light is bleeding through, but on the right the clouds are actually blocking the light, creating a darker and overcast appearance. This area here with the crater in it looks really cool, but once again, I'm assuming this isn't a crater. I'm assuming this is a lake here, and that the water hasn't been added yet, as we know that water is coming later. There's a video here showing the same lighting for the clouds, and about halfway through the video you can see that the clouds clear over the head of the engineer, and then the sun shines on him for a second, and then the sun is covered by clouds again a few seconds later, and visually that looks awesome. I think the clouds might have been sped up because I can't imagine they'll move this fast in game, but obviously they've done that just to show off this new effect. Also, once again, I'm pretty sure this is a river in front of us, but the water hasn't been added to it yet, so it just looks like a kind of weird ravine in the middle. This here is one of my favourite videos of planets we've got so far. It's of an engineer in a desert, and just look how beautiful this looks. Not just the textures, I mean the detail of the voxels that you can see. Those are real sand dunes. We don't have that in Space Engineers 1. Deserts are kind of like a little bit bumpy, and that's about it. And this looks absolutely amazing. Rover enjoyers, we've found where we can drive our new rovers around. It's going to be so good. So this section is going to be a bunch of MISC stuff like blocks, emotes, NPCs and stuff like that, starting with this hydrogen tank here. This currently isn't in the game, but they've shown off a render for it and also a fractured version of it, so I'm assuming we might be getting it quite soon. It's definitely very different to the hydrogen tanks we had in Space Engineers 1, but I'm sure there'll be a couple different variants of this. We've actually seen larger hydrogen and water tanks in previous screenshots, so if you want something a bit more round, we know that those exist. In the previous video, I said that the hydrogen thruster effect didn't look finished. It looked like it was a temporary one, and they have now replaced it with this one, which looks so much better. This actually looks more like what I expect a hydrogen thruster to look like. And they've also added a shower block, which you can see here, which is obviously cosmetic. I can't imagine they're going to add showering into Space Engineers 2, although there is water, so I guess you could add it. But currently you can't open the door, so you can't get in there. So Space Engineers take a shower, still impossible challenge? They released a video of my Nemesis making its way to Space Engineers 2, the hydrogen engine. Grrr! It does look pretty cool though. The pistons on the side moving up and down. It's not a spinning thing, but I do love any animations on blocks, so they might win me over with this one. But grrr, hydrogen engine. Flourish, you are not allowed anywhere near this. We know that in the back end of Space Engineers 2, they've been working on emotes, and one thing they've recently showed off was a multi-character emote. You can see this one here is an in-development version of a handshake emote. Obviously it's not done because the engineer teleports into the position of doing the handshake, but I'm sure this will be something that's pretty cool when it's finished. I know lots of games like Helldivers have the like hugging emote where two characters hug. I'm sure we could do rock, paper, scissors with this and stuff like that. As I always say, I love emotes in Space Engineers and I'm always happy to have some more. I actually have a suggestion for a couple. One where the engineer does a thumbs up and then one where he smashes a button in front of him, preferably a red one. I don't know, I just think that would be cool. We got this look here as an NPC design. We previously got this design here, which we were told was a faction leader. And based on what we know about the lore of the game, or at least what I know about the lore of the game, I said it belonged to a faction called the Legion of Engineers. And this one is AWB male, and AWB, I'm assuming, is Astronauts Without Borders, a second faction in Space Engineers 2. At some point, if I ever have any free time, I'm going to make a video talking about the lore of Space Engineers 2. It's something I'm very interested in, and there's a lot of information hidden in the game files about it that we can go through, and I think I can paint a pretty good picture of what's going on in Space Engineers 2. So like this video and subscribe to this channel if you want to see that.
This is where I could use my emotes, by the way.
But this design is so good. The Legion Engineer design, it's pretty cool, it's alright, you know. I did like it at the time, but this, wowie, this looks so much better. I don't know what specifically about it is I like. It's just such a clean design, almost too clean. Keen, where's the cable? So, combat. The most recent dev diary of Space Engineers 2 is literally all about combat, and it's pretty long, and this video is already long enough, so I'll just give you the cliff notes. Basically, they want to make combat better. They want to have longer, more tactical engagements. They want preparation to matter for combat. They want to have a rock, paper, scissors type balance system, so one type of weapon or strategy doesn't dominate. They want to make sure the player knows what's happening in combat, and they want to have proper feedback and clarity to it. And they want to support both offensive and defensive playstyles. One section which I think is very important to go over is combat duration and survivability, which they say, in Space Engineers 1, a single cockpit hit could end a fight instantly. We're thinking about ways of preventing this, possibly through shields or other durability layers that give players more time to react. The idea isn't to make combat slower for the sake of it, but to make it more interesting and fair. I don't really want to go into the shield debate, but as I've always said, I don't think shields fit Space Engineers. Space Engineers' primary mechanic for years has always been destruction, and shields are the opposite of that. I understand there's problems with combat, I'm not going to say they don't exist, but I feel like shields just put a band-aid over that, and they don't actually fix the problem. They just hide it for a bit. Part of me wants to be that guy that says, well, if your cockpit takes a hit and you die, that's bad ship design. But I also agree that the rule of cool exists, and having your cockpit on the outside of your ship is actually pretty cool. So I don't really know what the answer is there. Maybe your cockpit draws durability from the blocks around it, and it physically can't be destroyed by those high integrity blocks around it. I don't know. There is still an art to using a railgun to take out a cockpit in a single hit, so I don't really have a solution. I just don't think shields are the correct solution. They speak about rock, paper, scissors for combat, with automated and manual weapons beating automated turrets beating rockets and missiles, which is basically how Space Engineers 1 works, and rockets and missiles beating aimed weapons. So it'd be interesting to see how much this actually affects the AI, if you have to actually design different ships for different circumstances, maybe different factions use different types of weapons, or if this is mainly a PvP focused thing. One thing I really like the sound of is they talk about ways of detecting enemies using things like scanners and stuff like that. And with this, they could also add some sort of infiltration gameplay, where you could build some sort of stealth ship that can sneak up on people. One thing I've always hated about Space Engineers 1 is that every enemy, no matter how far away from them, if they are in antenna range of you, is a red marker on your HUD, and you'll just get spammed with like 20 red markers in the distance that you're miles away from, but the game has no other way of telling you there's a ship there, so it has to do it that way. So a sensor system that means you have to actually detect ships actually sounds really good. And also stealth gameplay also sounds really cool. Being able to sneak up to enemy bases and then just unload on them, taking all their defenses out immediately, sounds like a really fun way to play the game. They also talk about hacking encounters, which is something I've wanted for years. I hate that in Space Engineers 1, to take control of a block, you have to physically grind it down and then weld it back up. If hacking could be done some other way, maybe via a cable, I would love that. And one of the last things they talk about is character versus grid combat, where they talk about boarding ships and taking them over, combat-focused suit upgrades, and then dedicated tools for sabotage and infiltration. Now, I always go back and forward on this because Space Engineers isn't really about the engineer, it's about, you know, engineering ships and stuff like that. So if we make the game all about character combat, it kind of diminishes that aspect of the game. But at the same time, boarding a ship is pretty cool. They need to find a way of nerfing Hydra-Man so you just can't fly around with a grinder and grind down all the enemy ships' turrets and stuff like that. But if they can add a proper way of boarding ships and taking them over, I'm definitely all for that. But if they're going to do that, they need to massively overhaul the shooting mechanics because they are not good in Space Engineers 1. How combat should work is something the developers want feedback on. So in the description, I will link the combat blog post so you can leave a comment there if you have any ideas. Unless you're going to go and comment something about shields, and if that's the case, the link's not there. The description is completely empty, don't worry about it. We've had a lot of teasers recently about the next update for Space Engineers 1, including how food is going to work in the game, and also recent teasers showed us some of the new environmental hazards such as radiation, so a video about all of that will release very soon. And of course earlier I mentioned that I wanted to do a Space Engineers 2 lore video, and also there's a bunch of things hidden in the mod SDK like planets and new blocks and all kinds of things, so I'll be covering that in a future video as well. So don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel if you want to see any of those. And also, if you want to go the extra mile and support this channel, you can do so by becoming a Patreon or YouTube member with the links in the description below.